Hello, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Sister Cecilia Joy, a Franciscan sister of Christian Charity, and we're here today with Julianne Stanz, one of my favorite people from the Diocese of Green Bay. She is the director of parish life and evangelization for the Diocese of Green Bay, but she's also quite an author. So welcome.
Hello, it's so good to be with you, and you are one of my favorite people.
Thank you. So we saw her last time when she was advertising, when she was showcasing her book Start with Jesus. And now we've got Braving the Thin Places, which is an amazing book. I'm actually going to reread it for Lent because it's that good. You have to read it twice. So but speaking of thin places, Julianne, what's a thin place?
Yeah, this is a great question. I grew up in Ireland, like a lot of people know that because they hear the accent and they connect it directly with Ireland or Scotland or somewhere else. And growing up in Ireland, I was surrounded by just some of the most beautiful historic sites like Glendalough and Newgrange, dolmens and megalithic tombs. And, you know, those tombs, those beautiful historical sites are thousands of years old. In fact, Newgrange is 3,500 years older than the pyramids. And there was reasons that these places were, historically significant, and it was all because they were sacred sites. And there's this beautiful understanding in Celtic wisdom of this idea of the thin places, these places where people go to get away from life and to lean into their relationship with God in a different and greater way. And when you go to them, they feel thin because the veil between God and humanity seems to come closer together. I often use that expression, like it feels like heaven is breaking through. Mm-hmm. And I love that concept. And what I realized is we don't just have to go away to these places. Like the Celts always looked at searching for God in these wild, barren edges of life. But we can tap into those thin places in our own lives, not by going to Ireland, which is always a good idea, but or these special places, but really to look at all of life as sacred and to recognize that we are gifted with places where God is very present to us, especially during times of suffering or great joy.
Mm-hmm. When I was reading your book, I found myself thinking about, I used to go to the Shrine of Our Lady of Good Help a lot when I was discerning. So I'm like, oh, thin place.
That is a thin place. And really that's what it is, sister, is thin places are places where you can hear God speak to you, or where you can listen more attentively and really be attuned to his movement in your life. And I think because life is so busy today, we've lost an understanding of these thin places. So the shrine is a really good example of that because people go there to escape from the hustle and bustle, to entrust their worries to Our Lady. And I think that's a great example, is going to those places. That is a thin place.
Mm-hmm. So what inspired you to write the book? Because you've written a lot about like parish ministry and things like that, but like what inspired you to really get deep and personal and write such a book?
Yeah, I think this is the hardest question for an author. Is like, why this book and why now? And I should tell you, I actually wrote, this is a secret I haven't told very many people. My husband knows this, but I actually wrote this before Start with Jesus.
Oh, really?
Yes, but I started to write this book and I had been writing it for 20 years. So I carry a little notebook. It's pink and it's frayed. And every time something strikes me or I have an insight where God is speaking to me through something, I always would note it down. And so I've been doing that for 20 years, and I had a collection of various things that I wanted to explore. But when I was working with my publisher on this book, I said to them, I've got it. I think I have a concept here. I'm going to start working on it. And as I started writing, the cost of the writing was becoming very hard on me. It was so personal and it was so healing for me. And I knew it wasn't the right time. And so I often think, we don't decide to write books. Books decide to work with us to write themselves. And so I reached out at that time and said, after, 4 or 5 chapters, I can't do this right now. I'm not ready to go into some of those thin places in my life to unpack them for people. But I have this idea for Start with Jesus, and I think I can write that one first. So it is different than Start with Jesus and some of my other ministry books, because this one is part memoir, part Celtic, part spirituality, part scripture, part Greek mythology, and it's kind of a collection of various components of life that I really want to help people step into in a way that feels different and authentic too.
Now, my favorite chapter that you wrote on was like on the soul friend and soul story. Because soul friend, there's like one person I can think of, and I'm like, oh yeah, that sounds like a soul friend. But then the soul story, like telling your own soul story and really sharing that with people. But what was your favorite, not favorite, but like, what's like the most memorable chapter that you wrote?
I think there are lines in the book that I meditate on a lot. So, like the opening line of the book is each one of us stands at the threshold of a thin place and we are its gatekeeper. And my husband's like, what is that? And I'm like, anytime we go through anything that's joyful or painful in life, we have the opportunity to cross a threshold, to be more open to God or to be more closed off from Him. And so, there are lines from various sections of the book that I have literally spent 20 and 30 years meditating on. I think for me, I really love that chapter on the soul friend. It's something that almost in every talk I do, I find myself coming back to some concepts around what does it mean to have a soul friend? Because I think sometimes our culture has misrepresented it and misappropriated it to be a romantic, like this today I'll marry my best friend, my soulmate. Well, soul friends are different. They are the people who are our thin place, who really shed light on what God is doing in our lives in a really remarkable way. And so I wanted to bring what is a very old, I mean, we're talking going back to the time of St. Bridget here, 1600 years of wisdom unpacked in this tradition. So I really wanted to showcase that. So that is actually one of my favorite chapters in the book.
Oh, that's good. It was interesting because I was talking in the car with one of the sisters and I mentioned soul friend and she's like, oh, that's Irish. I'm like,
yep, so there's this beautiful story of Saint Bridget being in her kitchen or like her refectory, which is like, the monastic eating communal area. A gentleman comes in and Bridget says to him, are you okay? And he's like, yeah, I guess why? Now, it's obviously written far more scholarly than this. And she said, because I can see that half thy portion is gone, which is really interesting phraseology. But what she said is, I can see something from your spirit is not whole. And she said to him, your soul friend has passed. And then, so get thee to his requiem. And so this gentleman leaves, finds out his soul friend had passed, and Saint Bridget was able to discern and see that in prayer. So it's this beautiful concept, but it's definitely a uniquely Irish, Scottish, Cornish kind of an idea too. It's beautiful.
Now, I mentioned I'm going to reread this book for Lent. Why do you think this is such a great book to pick up during Lent?
Oh my gosh, so many reasons. So, one, because I think the themes that are very intrinsic to Lent, like prayer, fasting, almsgiving, and we're always trying to find ways to do those old practices and make them new. But also because there's things in there around fasting from your own ego, fasting against your own rigidity. And then I tell some of the stories of St. Patrick, who spent like 40 days and 40 nights in prayer. So some of these Lenten stories are in there. I mean, it's not specifically for Lent, but I find it just really a work of the Holy Spirit that the book released itself in time for Lent and St. Patrick's Day, which tells me that that is totally God's timing. Because I would never have thought about that, but there's definitely themes that I think can help people come to a greater sense of Holy Week as a thin place. Because Holy Week is all about God breaking through, the ordinary moments of our lives. The incarnation is the breaking through of God to dwell with us, humanly speaking, through His Son Jesus. And Holy Week is that place. It is that thin place of transformation. So I think it's a great read for Lent and Holy Week for sure.
Now, people can pick up this book just in time for Lent because we got a week for Lent. So people can probably order this book and get it right before Lent starts. You can get it on juliannestanz.com. I will have the website link in this description for this video. And then there's a special promotion. Do you want to talk about the promotion?
Yeah, so if you connect with me, however you connect with people these days, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all of those places you can find me. But if you email me or message me, I have a special, a little gift from my publisher. It's a special discount for friends and family, which you definitely qualify for. And I will send you the details on that, and you can order that way. It makes it easier for you.
Okay. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for talking with us today, Julianne. It's always a pleasure. And I just love your new book. So I hope that other people love it too.
I hope so too. And to anyone who's listening, I would say Slán agus Beannacht, which is goodbye and God's blessings to you. And I hope if you do decide to read this book that you encounter the sacred edges of your own thin place on those pages, because that is the most important message that I wanted to share, which is God is moving in your life too. And that is a blessing.
Thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful day. God bless everyone.
God bless.